Hello. Arguably the best known naval mutiny, the subject of a couple of blockbuster movies, involved HMS Bounty, a merchant vessel bought by the Royal Navy in 1787 and refitted specifically for an expedition to transport breadfruit from the South Pacific to the West Indies. In 1789, with the mission underway, the mutineers, led by Acting Lieutenant Fletcher Christian, took control of the ship, casting Captain William Bligh and 18 crew members who remained loyal and refused to take part in the revolt adrift in an open launch in the South Pacific. Mutiny, a capital offence in the Royal Navy, was rare, but by the 1790s, discontent amongst ordinary seamen was widespread. Poor living conditions below deck, longer at sea due to copper bottoming of the fleet, the demands of war, harsh discipline, and career sailors having to serve alongside impressed landsmen, convicts and quotamen, all contributed to a deteriorating situation at a time when Navy pay had failed to keep pace with inflation. There were several minor incidents in the run-up to two serious events that took place in 1797. One involving 16 Royal Navy ships anchored at Spithead near Portsmouth, backed by sailors at Plymouth, and a second concerning ships moored at the Nore, a sandbank in the Thames estuary close to the River Medway, led by HMS Sandwich, a ship known for overcrowded conditions. Mutiny is the correct term, but viewed from a contemporary perspective, the action at Spithead in particular was closer to what we would call industrial action. The demands of the sailors taking part were chiefly focused on better pay and improved shipboard conditions. One of the grievances was the practice of the purser, a ship's paymaster in charge of supplies, keeping 2 ounces of every pound of meat for himself, a privilege known as the purser's pound. The men were well organised. Representatives were elected to negotiate with the Admiralty. On-board discipline was observed and an undertaking given to suspend action if enemy ships were sighted. It was still a serious insurrection at a time of war, and amid fears by the authorities that a revolution similar to the recent terror in France could take place in Britain. With tension between the Admiralty and the mutineers rising, Lord Richard Howe, Admiral of the fleet, took personal charge of resolving the situation, visiting the ships at Spithead and speaking directly to the men. The result was an increase in pay, abolition of the purser's pound, reassignment of some unpopular officers, and importantly, a royal pardon for all involved. The action at the Nore had more political overtones. Among the demands were changes to the Articles of War, peace with France, and the dissolution of Parliament. In response, the Admiralty offered the same terms as those agreed at Spithead, conditional on an immediate return to duty. The delegates elected to represent the men turned the offer down and began a blockade of the port of London, while the leaders of the mutiny made plans to sail for France, an escalation not supported by the majority of the sailors taking part. One by one, the ships involved slipped their anchors and the mutiny petered out. No action was taken against the majority of the men, but the man who had led the mutiny, Richard Parker, who had re-enlisted as an ordinary seaman after being dismissed from the Navy as a master's mate for refusing to obey an order, was arrested, court-martialed and hung from the yard arm of the Sandwich where the mutiny began, along with 29 co-conspirators. Some of the other key players were sentenced to be flogged, transported to Australia or given prison terms. Elsewhere in the same year, 1797, a notorious mutiny took place in the West Indies on board HMS Hermione. Captain Hugh Piggott, who had a reputation for handing out severe punishments, demoted midshipman David Casey and had him flogged for refusing to apologise on his knees for a wrongly tied reefing rope by a sailor under his supervision. A few days later, 3 sailors fell to their deaths climbing down from the yards after reefing the topsails in order to avoid a flogging Piggott had promised for the last man down. Piggott had their bodies tossed unceremoniously into the sea. Objectors to this treatment of their fellow crew members received a flogging for speaking out. The next day, a rum-fueled group that included 3 junior officers attacked Captain Piggott in his cabin, stabbed him several times and threw him over the side. In the mayhem that followed, another 8 officers were murdered. Hermione was then surrendered to the Spanish. 33 mutineers eventually faced trial. 24 were hung, 1 transported, and the remainder acquitted. Hermione was recaptured and renamed Retribution. Next time, I'm going to look at emerging technological advances and the beginning of the end of the Age of Sail. If you've enjoyed this video, hit the like and subscribe buttons and click on the notification bell to be informed when the next video is available, or you can subscribe by clicking on the rose window over my shoulder.